They came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout and say, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. My great-grandmother, Verna Green, always seemed like a saint to me. She raised me in a lot of ways. Always stayed at her house when I was sick, when I had to play hooky from school, and my mom was at work, and I'd hang out with her, and we would watch The Golden Girl at nighttime and Murder, She Wrote, and Wheel of Fortune, and all those good shows. And then one of my most favorite things to do was to have her friends, Russ and Mary Allen, come over and we'd play canasta and 500 and stuff. And he was, 70, 80 years old, but he'd call me old man, even though I was 11, 12, something like that. Eat lots of ice cream there, lots of cookies. It was wonderful. To me, she was nothing short of an angel. But in God's eyes, she must have been a horrible sinner. She must have done something terribly, terribly wrong, because from the beginning, she was born in 1915, and it wasn't that much longer after she'd been born that her mother died. And her father decided that he was just too busy with his new wife and their new children, and he really didn't have time for her, so he sent her off to live with an aunt. And then as she got older, she met her husband, and they got married. And everything seemed to be going well for a while. They had 3 daughters, sounds kind of like Job, 3 beautiful daughters, until one of them, the youngest at the age 25, contracted some type of a strange blood disease, and they really weren't sure what it was, and unfortunately doctors could do nothing for her. And so at the age of 25, she died. Then as time passes, my own grandmother at the age of 57, an alcoholic, drinks herself to death. And my great-grandmother outlives her and has to bury another daughter. And just before that, her son-in-law, whom she was closer to than any son could be with their own mother, falls dead of a heart attack, like that. And she buries him. And then her husband of 50-some years, maybe 60-some years actually, gets Alzheimer's disease and starts to become violent and paranoid, wanting to get out of the house and go home, and calling her every name in the book and accusing her of cheating and saying, "You're not my wife, I want to go home to my real wife and kids," breaking her heart every day, especially when the sun would go down and he'd become more agitated and more anxious. And so on and so forth. And she lived to the ripe old age of 85 to watch all of these things happen. In fact, she was just this close to making it to seeing Weston before, but she missed it by about 6 months. So I wonder, what was it that she did? Because she must have done something horrible to cause God to punish her in that way. She always seemed good to me, but with all the loss that she experienced in her life, there must have been something going on that created this process of divine retribution. Sin versus good works. And this is where we find Job. It seems like a slap in the face to Job that he got everything back, and that he lived to this ripe old age of 4 generations. Because if we think about it, in 4 generations, it probably would have been better had Job died right after everything happened, because that's a lot of suffering to go through. And so when I think about how old my great-grandma lived, well, that's great. She got to see her grandkids and great-grandkids and some great-great-grandkids. But for what? that suffering, why would you even want to be around? It's almost like God is somehow torturing you, some kind of a sick divine joke. And that was the way it was with Job. He gets everything back. And he lives to see his grandchildren and then 4 more generations. And why? Why torture the poor man so much? I think it's almost like the sick joke, because God should have just left him alone. Should have just left him with his dead children and his dead livestock and his crushed house and his dead fields. Why did God have to go and play games with him? Playing these mind games and saying, okay, fine, I'll give it all back to you. Well, how could God give back his kids? Those were his kids, for Pete's sake. And they had died. And then God gives them new ones, as if somehow that makes it all better. And to put the icing on the cake, now having a 3-year-old daughter, I get that having the 3 most beautiful daughters in the land was not necessarily a blessing, because I know they didn't have shotguns back then. So I don't know what God was doing with Job. But this whole chapter seems really, really messed up. Because if we just stopped in chapter 41, we've got Job left there being rebuked by God, saying, look, I created everything, you don't know nothing, so sit down and shut up. Doesn't make things easier, doesn't fix anything, but at least Job can know what the score is, so to speak. He can at least learn to deal with the situation in his current mindset and somehow try to pick himself up from all the ashes and the dirt and put something back together. But no, God has to go messing with him again. He says, okay, I'm going to give you twice as much now. But before I do that, you are going to have to make a sacrifice on behalf of your dummy friends who think they know it all. God couldn't just forgive them. God couldn't just say, well, you're mere mortals. How could you know the ways of God? Such a thing is impossible, so of course I forgive you. No, God said, Job, you have to make a sacrifice on behalf of the 3 stooges here. And he did. And then God, in his infinite kindness, forgave them. Oh, how nice. But it still doesn't make any sense to me. Unless this chapter doesn't belong. Unless this chapter was added later, which in fact is what many scholars believe. See, the first 41 chapters are wisdom literature. They don't make sense, but in some difficult way, in light of our own sufferings and our own losses, in some way they do kind of make sense. That we're going to suffer, and most of the time, there aren't going to be any answers as to why. But then this 42nd chapter. Because somebody couldn't stand that it didn't all come together and that this divine retribution principle wasn't proved in the end. And so they added chapter 42. And it puts it all back together. And God says, okay, you repented in a heap of ashes. You admitted that you're a knucklehead. I forgive you. I'm going to give you twice as much back. You do good, I bless you. You do bad, I take it away. And so everything comes together in the end. But we all know that it does not come together in the end for most of us. We can't say at the end that Job figured it all out, even if we left chapter 42 in there. We can't say that Job could sit and relax and everything was okay, because think about it. 4 generations. Think of the infant mortality rates back then. Think of the life expectancy back then. If he lived for another 4 generations, he saw a lot more children and children's children and great-grandchildren die than he did the first time around. So he continued to be tortured. But I don't think that's what happened. I think in our attempt to make sense out of things, we sometimes make things worse. There's nothing wrong with seeking answers. We look at the passage where Jacob wrestled with the angel of God until morning and said, I will not let you go until you bless me. That, I think, is our model. Job sitting there feeling God only knows what. He didn't talk until almost the end of the book. How could he? What is there to say in such a situation? You're going to lift your head to the heavens and say, what the heck is wrong with you? Imagine the emotions and the feelings. We can't come to this text with our mind and try to wrap it around the meaning and try to figure out what the heck is going on and then try to take that meaning and put it on our own lives and say, why do we have to go through so much crap? That's not the point. The point is, what do we feel when those things happen? What's it like when we've just had so much that we are at our breaking point and there is nothing left for us to do but to seek out God and ask for a little mercy? It's like that game when we bend the arms down like this until we feel like they're going to break and we finally say mercy, crying uncle, right? It's at that point that we finally turn to God and say, mercy, I can't take it anymore. Bartimaeus was at the point, and I doubt it was just because of his blindness, that he cried mercy. He recognized Jesus for who he was. See, all the other people, written in English, it's kind of hard to catch this, all the other people called him Jesus of Nazareth. Right? They called him by his name from the place where he had come from. But he said, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. The text tells us what Bartimaeus means. Bar means son of. This man's called son of Timaeus. He didn't even have a name of his own. He had nothing. He had the cloak on his back, and that was it. He didn't have a sight. He didn't have any food. He didn't have any money. He didn't even have an identity. And we see the son of Timaeus so many times in the New Testament. The woman at the well, when Jesus says, I know what you have told me is true, and not only have you been married 6 times, but the man you're living with now is also not your husband. He knew her, despite her not having an identity. The demoniac, when Jesus comes ashore from the Sea of Galilee at the Gerasenes, and the man is crazy, breaking his chains, the man had no identity. He was just the demoniac that everybody had cast out. The woman who came to the table that we read about a month ago, asking for mercy for her daughter, and Jesus called her a dog. She said, even the dogs catch the scraps that fall off of the table. She and her daughter had no identity, but Jesus gave them one. The son of Timaeus went to Jesus with so many things heaped on him, so much going on. And when finally those people said, get up and go because Jesus has called you to his side, finally, this man had been recognized by God and had a sense of identity. And he took the one thing that he had, the one thing that kept him warm, the one thing that gave him some sense of security, and he threw it off. And he went to Jesus. I don't know how he got to Jesus. I don't know if he listened for his voice. I don't know if somebody helped him along, because the text doesn't say that. Supposedly, he still can't see at this point. But something guided him to where he needed to be, so that Jesus could tell him, your faith has healed you. You have cried out to me for mercy, and I give it to you. Not that I have caused your pain, not that I even always take away your pain, but when you come to my side, I stand beside you. I give you rest. I give you comfort. And I give you mercy. And that, in hindsight, when I think of my great-grandmother and the way she taught me to pray when I was a kid, She taught me that now I lay me down to sleep, which I always thought was pretty morbid. Dear God, if you kill me while I'm sleeping, please at least take me to heaven with you. Okay. The Lord's Prayer and the Serenity Prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. In my great-grandmother's life, and in her experiences, just like Job, she knew that there would be times when I would suffer, and when things didn't make a lick of sense. And in those moments, she taught me the words to say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me.